Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Conversation, coming to you from the Bondi Art Lounge. Now today I have a very special guest with me, Robert Scheinfeld. Robert, welcome. Good to have you on The Conversation. Now, there's no better way to introduce Robert than to tell you a little bit about how I actually started speaking. Most of you have heard a little bit about my story. I've had a pretty interesting upbringing, I should call it. My mum's a very intuitive, conscious type of mum, if you like, and at first I thought my mum was crazy until I met Robert. When I met Robert, I thought, okay, there's another crazy person out there, or what they're talking about there's some truth to it. So yeah, that's what Robert did for me. Robert switched on a lot of things for me, and if it wasn't for Robert, I probably wouldn't be speaking about what I'm speaking about today. I wouldn't be coaching about it. I definitely wouldn't be writing about it. So after I met Robert and experienced his profound programs, that's really when things switched on, and that's what I do today. You know, speak, coach, write, and so I'm bringing you back to where it all started for me. Over 8 years ago, we had dinner last night. We were trying to count how many years ago it was. It's over 8 years ago. I used to be a promoter. Most of you know I used to promote speakers. Robert was the final speaker I ever promoted. For those who don't know my story, I used to promote speakers that I felt had the next piece of the puzzle for me, who had the, you know, what I was yearning for in truth, in self-realization, whatever you want to call it. And Robert's work came across my desk one day. I listened to it, and like I said, he was the final guy I ever promoted. And after that, there was nothing else. So Robert, it's good to have you on the show and have you back in Australia.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So now you are also the author of a New York best-selling book, Busting Loose from the Money Game, Busting Loose from the Business Game. You've also written another book, which is
Ultimate Key to Happiness.
Ultimate Key to Happiness. And I know a lot of my clients I send to I suggest for them to read that book. You're doing a 5-day program. You're doing 2 5-day programs in Sydney at the moment. Ultimate Key, is it?
To Freedom.
Ultimate Key to Freedom. So there's so much I can talk about. I know I'm not going to squeeze this into one episode, so I know this is probably going to be part 1, part 2, part 3, and but let's start with money, since we talk about busting loose from the money game, busting loose from the business game. Everyone always talks about money. I want to talk about money. I want to talk about truth. I want to talk about relationships. We'll see whatever else comes up. But last night we were having a conversation with some friends, and they were talking about, you know, money. Does it bring you happiness? You know, having more money, what does it actually bring you? I mean, what are your thoughts around the idea of money and how it plays in our everyday living? And
Geez, I could talk for 5 days just on that.
I know.
Where I have ultimately come to is that our lives are all extraordinary stories. And even though we tend to consciously want something else a lot of the time, when there needs to be money flowing very strongly in our stories, it is. What needs to get funded gets funded. What doesn't need to get funded doesn't get funded. And the flow, when it's loose, when it's tight, when it's whatever, it all supports you fulfilling your mission, your story unfolding the way it's meant to. And money is an interesting thing because it ripples into every other area of your life. It affects everything, and it limits your focus, because if you don't have a lot of money, you don't have as many options, and so your focus gets narrowed. So it's a great thing to push on, and it's a great thing to manipulate in order to support you. And in my life, you know my story. In my younger years, I kept running cycles of up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and every time I ran a cycle, the numbers got bigger.
Yeah.
So when I was in my 20s, it was thousands, and then it was tens of thousands, and then it was hundreds of thousands, and then it was millions. But I kept doing up, down, up, 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 crash and burn, up, 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 crash and burn, and I kept trying to break that cycle. But ultimately, if I didn't run that cycle, I wouldn't have made the discoveries that I did. Like you said, I wouldn't have become a writer and a speaker, and I would have, so it was all supportive, even though I hated it at the time, you know, and it was very, very difficult, and I tried to stop it. So it's raw material to build great stories from.
Yeah.
Whether it's flowing strongly, it's not. It's flowing strongly and you're buying stuff, trying to be happy, and then you find out you won't be.
Yeah.
Because that's the interesting thing. If you look, we all have a fantasy. I would just be happier if I had more money. But if you look around at the people that have more money, that isn't the case. And it's a real charge, but it's great raw material for building amazing stories from, and it's used brilliantly by the writer that's writing all of our stories, you know.
Yeah. So what about happiness? What are your thoughts about happiness? Because some people talk about, well, is happiness even real? Is it something that we accomplish? But there's a lot of people pursuing happiness. I mean, what are your ideas around happiness?
Well, this is something that changed for me radically in the last 3 or 4 years. And this is actually something we're going to go deeply into in the 5-day event that we're going into. And it's hard to soundbite it, but basically what I used to think and what most people think is that if you look at all the emotions that run inside of you, we tend to be aware of, I feel this emotion and I call that negative anger, and I call that doesn't feel good and I don't like that and I want to get rid of it, or depression or frustration or whatever. And then there's one kind of an emotion that we call happiness and peace and serenity, and there's all these. And what we tend to want to do is make all the negatives go away.
Yeah.
Just have the positives left and hopefully amp the positives so that we feel even more. What I've discovered, and I didn't see this coming and it blew me away, but now it's as clear as day, and everybody that I've shown how to see this for yourself, because it's not an idea, it's an experience, is that to me what true happiness is not making the negatives go away and the positives stay and get amplified. It's realizing, and again, not as an idea, as an experience, that there's no such thing as positives and negatives. There's just this movement of energy inside of you. And so the way I show this is, imagine that this is the movement of emotion inside of you.
Yeah.
And it moves in different ways and has different characteristics. Then there's a story about it. This particular movement is anger and it feels bad and I hate it. This particular movement of energy is, there's a story that gives it a name and gives it a positive or a negative.
Yeah.
The story bonds to this movement of emotion, and then we think we're angry and we feel bad. But if you remove the story, and you just experience the movement of energy inside of you, all the different varieties are all fine. And the interesting thing is, everybody has experienced this in one of 3 ways. If they ride a ride at an amusement park, if you happen to like roller coasters, do you like roller coasters? Have you ever been on one?
I was always the kid that avoided that.
Okay.
But I probably really would like it now.
Well, I give the 3 examples because some people don't like roller coasters and some people don't the other things I'm going to tell you. So we'll do that last.
Yeah.
If you're watching a movie and the movie's 2.5 hours, the whole 2.5 hours you are feeling all kinds of different emotions. But the mind does not stop to say, I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm frustrated, I feel good, I feel bad, there's no names and there's no judgments, there's just the run of emotions for 2.5 hours, and at the end, if it's a good movie, what do we say?
Great movie.
Wow.
Fantastic.
And when we say, wow, great movie, what we mean is, I experienced all these emotions, but there were no names, there were no judgments, I just felt the movement of energy. So to me, true happiness is experiencing the full range of emotions without the story and the name, and appreciating all of them, just like you do with a movie. The same thing happens when you read a novel. And the same thing happens when you ride a roller coaster. For 5 minutes, whatever it is, you feel all these emotions. If you stopped to say, what's that one called? And is that a good one or a bad one? When you're riding a roller coaster, a lot of times you'd say, that's fear and that's... But when you're riding the roller coaster, you don't. The mind doesn't engage and you just feel. And my current bias is, the thing that humans like most is that. Feeling a lot of emotions without the story. So to me, what happiness is really about is not making the negatives go away and the positives stay and amp. It's taking the stories away, which you can do, and just experience the pure flow of emotional energy without the names and without the judgments, and just loving that. That's what happiness really is to me.
So it's fully immersing yourself in the experience you're having or the feelings that you're having without labeling or judging.
Yeah, but it isn't something comes up and you go, God, I'm really angry. Oh, no, I'm not. This is just a movement of energy, and it's not a technique. There can be a shift that takes place inside, because when you're in a movie
Yeah.
You're reading a novel, you're riding a roller coaster, you don't make a decision that you're not going to attach the names and the stories. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That can be the same thing in life.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. And so you just experience what you said, the full range of emotions, no matter what it is, and all of it is appreciated, welcomed, liked, whatever word you want to use. And the weird thing is, you could experience what you used to call anger, frustration, depression, whatever, and it could be the same exact thing that you used to say, I hate this, get me out of this, and you'd go have a drink, you'd go take a drug, you'd go work out, whatever, to get out of this bad feeling.
Yeah.
Except now you enjoy it, which happens when you're in a movie. So to me, that's what happiness really is, and it's part of what I facilitate people having the experience where the story separates and then goes away.
Yeah.
And you just experience this constant flow, and all of it's welcome. It's extraordinary. And again, it's not a new skill.
Yeah.
You don't have to develop into it. Everybody already knows how to do it because they do it with movies, they do it with novels, they do it with roller coaster rides, they do it when they watch sports. Same thing happens.
Yeah.
You know, there's what you'd call fear and other kinds of negative emotions when you're watching sports. But the mind doesn't come in and give it a name or a judgment. You just feel, and that's why we watch sports. That's why we go to movies.
Yeah.
Because we want to feel. But we really want to feel without the name and the judgment. And so, it's within everybody's grasp. And the flip side of it is, if you try to do the other thing, make the negatives go away, no one ever succeeds at that.
Yeah.
It's impossible. The only way to be happy is this. That everybody tries to do that, everybody fails.
Yeah. It's very relatable what you're talking about, because we're talking about sports, movies, and I completely relate with that, and I've heard you say something similar in the past. And I find that when you are experiencing, when you're not labeling the emotion or judging it, like it feels like you are part of it. Like I feel one with the feeling of what I'm having, but when I've labeled or judge it, there's like I'm separate from it. Like there's this feeling I don't want to have. I'm trying to resist it, or
you're fighting,
addicting it, or addicted to a feeling. And anyway, there's something you really spoke about there that I want to go towards, and you said it's not a tool or a technique. It's something along those lines, and I want to talk about that because there is so much tools and techniques, methods to being enlightened, or to be happy, or to be empowered, or whatever you want to call it. And I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this idea of tools, techniques, whether that being a meditation, whether that being NLP or whatever, because from my story, you know what? I think that's something we'll probably get to next week. I'm going to actually wrap it up here, and then we're going to.
Can I say one thing though, so I don't forget?
Yeah, go ahead.
The other interesting thing about that whole thing about emotions without the story, is if you experience the pure emotion of what you would call depression, and you experience the pure emotion of what you would call peace, they're almost identical. The only difference is that what most people call depression, it's the same thing as peace, except it's perceived as a little heavier. But if you look at just what's actually happening inside of you, it's almost identical. But the story is so powerful. What we call anger, frustration, and excitement, almost identical. If you experience the pure movement, that's how powerful these stories are. That the same thing, this is bad and I hate it, and this is good and I love it and I want it more, just because of how hypnotic the stories are. And it's people that did the earlier work used the process and would dive into the middle of discomfort, began to notice that kind of a thing too. Because when they did that, they would start to feel for the moment. They didn't realize what we just talked about, but they started to notice, wait a minute, what's actually there, it's not so bad, it's not so scary, it's not so, but the stories are just so hypnotic.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so we'll continue this conversation. And we're going to come back next week to talk about the tools, techniques, and methods to finding yourself or happiness or whatever it is that you're looking for.